Five.
And we're live. All right. Well,
Okay.
welcome everyone to Emergent Gameplay. I understand that we're in the Scioto Odd Room, right? And let me see here. I'm your moderator for this panel. My name is Victor Raymond. And before we get started, what I'd like to do is to invite our audience to pass along questions in the Discord channel, and then those will get relayed to us through Zoom group chat. And before we get into the substance of the panel, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Jay.
Hi, y'all. My name's Jay Holtham. I'm primarily a writer, mostly in TV these days, working currently on Supergirl. I've worked on a couple of other comic book shows in the past. As far as gameplay goes, I guess as I could safely say I'm a regular streamer at happyjacks.org. Happy Jacks RPGs. Currently in a Savage World game there every Wednesday night. I'm also a regular cast member with 12 Sided Stories, an RPG actual play podcast that comes out semi randomly. The first episode of our Heliotrope campaign just dropped yesterday or today, I forget which one. And those are the places you can generally find me on the internet.
Excellent. Jeremy, take it away.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Holcomb. I'm a game designer. I've made a number of collectible card games, board games. I made an anachronism for the History Channel and the Duke, and I made the White Box game design toolkit to help other people make games. I teach game design at DigiPen Institute of Technology, and it's my personal quest to play every game at least once. So I'm certainly interested in other people making stuff so that I can experience it. I use he, him pronouns, and I can be found on Twitter at I was paid to say.
Oh, all right. Excellent. And we were, I think, expecting to have a fourth panelist, Whitney Strix-Beltran, who is not here yet. Hopefully she will be able to join us. My name is Victor Raymond. As I mentioned before, my pronouns are he, him, or they, there. And let's see here. My own background, I have been involved with gaming since I was quite young. And I have played role-playing games. Well, I started with board games and board war games, and then I became a role player in 1975 when I was far too young. And since then, I have been involved with a number of different science fiction conventions and game conventions. And most recently, I am the chair of the Tecumel Foundation, which oversees the creative legacy of Professor M.A.R. Barker, The World of Tecumel, the setting for Empire of the Petal Throne. And we do a podcast for that, which is at techumelpodcast.com. You can find me there. So I have a note here that we're hoping to get Strix soon. But let's see here. I think probably a good question to start with is just a little bit, what do we mean by emergent gameplay? Just so that we know what we're talking about. Who'd like to start on that?
Hey, you want to drive that?
Oh, I was going to defer to you.
No.
I guess we're talking about, when you sort of deviate from the sort of in the box rules of a game, homebrews, new games that are being made, I would assume are part of emergent gameplay. People taking systems and developing their own ways of using them and their own ways of developing them would be all that I would put under the umbrella of emergent gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think the thing I try to internalize as a designer is that it's not useful to talk about the game in the box, right? That there's, as if the game is in somehow complete without the people who are playing it. And the most important part, the thing that we should be designing for, in my opinion, is that interaction between the people and the system. So the goal of a designer should be to create a space that has enough hooks, enough things for people to connect with, and then let them do their job and get out of the way. It really varies based on type of game. And I think we're going to talk about, tabletop role-playing games and LARPs and board games, and emergent gameplay flows differently in different spaces.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that. I particularly like this idea of how do people engage with what they have rather than designer intent. People don't have magical connections back to the designers, so what do they do? But then I'm going to use role playing for just a moment as an interesting example of this. What that meant in the history of role playing games, I mean, starting with original Dungeons and Dragons back in 1974, is that you can look at the early history of tabletop role playing as that's exactly what people did with games that came later. Is that people proceeded to look at D&D and say, what an interesting idea. What else can we do with this? And so the emergent play character and design was to come up with games that came immediately afterwards, and different genres.
Yeah, I think that's fair, although I think your time zone is incorrect. I think that it's more useful to go much, much, much further back. Dungeons and Dragons was a wonderful beginning of the tabletop role-playing space. But we're dating back to cave paintings. We're dating back to the earliest language, right? Like the core idea of role-playing games as a concept evolve around this idea of, just the idea of players and a game master, the idea of that interaction is interactive storytelling.
Right.
We've been doing that since before recorded history. Dungeons and Dragons created a framework and popularized it in a very specific way. Right. But it didn't create that method of player interaction.
Far be it for me to suggest that
Sure.
was the first place. Merely that there was, springboarding off of what Jay was saying, this idea of what have we got? What can we make with this, right? But having brought that up, Jeremy, I think you've got an interesting point. What we talk about in terms of games goes back millennia. And the stories that people tell, that the rounds of storytelling that take place, the games that get played, their emergent play is a characteristic we see time and time and time again, right?
Yeah.
And it affects everything. Board games. If I can put on my history professor hat here for a minute, but just chess, right? The way pieces move in chess have changed over time based not on any designer intent, right? There was nobody to drive that bus, but based on the political reality of the time, right? The Queen of England said, hey, the queen in this game is not powerful enough, and literally changed how queens work in chess by fiat. Right. And in response, the church went, well, OK, we can't say no. But if the queen's going to be more powerful, then the bishops have to be more powerful. And then that changed. It's all going on around the edges.
Yeah. A game is always going to be reflective of its time and its place, especially something that, is going to be sourced from people, because you're going to bring yourself sort of to the table and bring kind of your cultural expectations, your history, your political needs, and whatnot is all going to be part of what is going to develop and change a game. To bring it back to D&D, we're just sort of coming to, or we're still in the midst of a fairly kind of turbulent moment for D&D, as it's having to confront sort of the implicit biases built into the system itself, and how do you change that for a world that has, in some ways, radically changed from 1975 to now, and our understanding of, not so much the world hasn't changed, but our lens on it has focused, and we've realized, oh crap, the concept of a race inherent characteristic is probably not real useful. That is probably bad. We should not do that. And developing that as watching the game sort of in real time change.
Yeah, that there's a whole cascade of things that lead to this. That, the overly determinate use of the alignment system, the introduction in first edition of half-orcs that never get really explained, which creates a space for people to have emergent play happen, right?
Exactly.
And then as each edition has come along, there have been different elements of design that have built to this moment. And I agree with you. I mean, there are some other arguments that could be made, but D&D has become in its own way so self-referential that I think that we shouldn't be surprised that this has happened. Right. I do think that there are ways, and I should probably say in my own background as a sociologist, that there are some ways that people should look at what the game talks about and how it talks about things to understand what's intended. And sometimes people aren't paying attention to that, right? And I mean, even the designers, like, well, if you're saying race, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, and that gets back to the space where designers have to understand that what we do is put stuff out into the world, and we're kind of going, look, the game is about this. And in some ways, players look at that and go, okay, cool, right? Like, let's do that. And in other ways, they're going to look at us and go, no, right? Actually, you're wrong. And that's not what this game is about. And that's not how it's going to behave. And when enough of the audience says, no, that's wrong, that's when we start seeing these systemic shifts. That's when we start seeing, again, Dungeons & Dragons is a great example. You see this actually in Magic the Gathering. You see this in a number of Wizards of the Coast products and other products. And also, there's so much calcified history, right? I think you're right to go, hey, we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons because it's the biggest ogre in the room. Smaller entities, a Green Ronin or a Kobold Press or something, can take their products and pivot much, much, much faster in response to player intent and in response to public feedback, because they're getting Dungeons & Dragons to do something different is like turning a battleship. It's doable, but it's just, regardless of how much you want it, it just takes a long time.
I was going to say super tanker. It's like,
sure,
it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
Well, and that's also, I think, actually one of the places where, particularly, I don't want this to be all about D&D, but this recent discussion, Jay, I'm so glad you brought that up, is this notion of, yeah, it takes a while for Wizards to respond, particularly now as a division of Hasbro, but on top of that, there's now, I mean, with the DMs Guild and all the rest of that, you are capable of adding material, which people already have done, right? They've already taken the steps to put in material on background and culture, which I think is like, yes, let's move in that direction. That's a much clearer way of doing things.
Well, and on the subject of emergent gameplay, I mean, that's just recognition of a cold reality. The whole D20 license system was, I think, a recognition that, oh, wait, people are creating content on their own anyway. Stopping them is, one, not possible, and two, probably stupid. Yeah. So can we have some way to curate it a little bit and provide a certain more back and forth to it, which is a good concept. I mean, user-generated content is free money when it doesn't kill you.
Right. And, yeah, I mean, and the history of D&D is, in fact, it has a certain amount of boomerang back and forth between this.
Yeah.
That's worth paying attention to, at least particularly now.
Yeah.
Are there other, I mean, as I said, I didn't want this to be completely about D&D. Are there other frames which we should take a look at for understanding this?
You want to talk about LARPs for a minute?
Yeah, let's go for LARPs. Let's do it.
So LARP, live action role-playing games, by their nature, like riff off of tabletop role-playing games in that there's a bunch of player input and player interaction, but almost rely on that sort of emergent gameplay, right? I ran LARPs in New York for several years. I've played in quite a few, mostly Vampire the Masquerade, of course, one of the more popular LARPs, but I've played Changeling and Wraith and Mage and the whole White Wolf package. With a tabletop role-playing game, I mean, let's zoom into the play space for a minute. Ignoring the designer for a moment, theoretically, there's often a game master who sort of says, I am shaping this world. And I feel like, you do you. But for me, a good game master is not in charge, but they're creating a framework in which the players are experiencing this world. But what's your ratio? One game master to 4 players, 5 players, however many ways we can divide this pizza. A LARP, you start having 1 or 2 or 3 people in charge and 40 people, 50 people, 60 people running around a space you can't see. I ran a LARP in New York that was 60 players once a week. And now most of the gameplay is emergent. Even the game master can't possibly know, let alone control, even a meaningful percentage of what's happening. And so the players are more aware of that control and influence they have. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's such a powerful experience and so different than what you can get from anything else. I miss LARPing in New York.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, there's something to, I don't LARP, but like there's something to the more open-ended a game master can make the game, and the more that it does move into this place of communal storytelling. I play with Happy Jacks. I've played a lot of PBTA games, various sort of brands and flavors. And one of the things I like about that system is that it is so sort of fungible and can be applied to so many different things. One of the campaigns we did was a PBTA style game set in the universe of Fallout, and it's always exciting, when you're as a player, when you say something and your GM goes, "Oh, you've given me a gift for later," and it's something that's coming that is not in their plan, and they didn't expect it, and it now opens up a whole new space, and you're exactly right about the GMs who are sort of open for that, and who are not stuck to whatever story they're trying to tell. They really are letting you wander through this world, and you can trust that they will have something for you when you get there.
And that's the thing. I think really it's about that gift to the player of control, often with the illusion of a lack of control. But I've seen people design for emergent gameplay, for example, game masters or people who have designed modules where there are puzzles or things to solve where there's clearly a puzzle and the requisite puzzle pieces, and there's clearly a goal that is being blocked by this puzzle, but the designer actually doesn't have a solution. The module does not say, move this here, say these words, and then it opens. They don't know how the puzzle is solved. And so they're just going, hey, players, play. Like literally, just stop solving the puzzle and start playing in the space. And at some point, the GM will see them say something where they're like, yes, that's way better than what I would have come up with. That's how this puzzle works.
Yeah.
It virtually guarantees that the players feel smart. You do need, backups in case it doesn't work. Yeah. But it works more often than it doesn't.
Yeah, but that gets to the dictum of, say yes or roll dice.
Sure.
That you have this, and the actually in terms of not so good design is, and this happens again with older modules to some extent, is that you get where, well, here's the puzzle, and if they don't figure it out, nothing progresses.
Right.
And if that's played as it is, then, well, I guess we're done here, which is not satisfying to any of the players.
Right, exactly. It's funny. I play in a regular D&D game right now, and for whatever reason, the character that I sort of adopted is like the group grump, and is the one who's always like, "Guys, what are we doing? Like, this is stupid. We should go." And every now and then we do, just like, well, sometimes we get to a scenario and we're like, nope, we're not going that way. And like, the good thing about my GM for it is that he usually has 3 or 4 things planned.
Sure.
And like knows which way we're going to go, or not knows which way we're going to go, but depending on whether we go left or right, whatever. And sometimes we just don't do anything. And that's its own sort of joy. I feel like that is definitely that level of creativity. And again, bringing it back to the storytelling. Like I mentioned, this Fallout game, one of the really fun things that happened was, so we were playing these characters, a post-apocalyptic, we were doing this thing. We came into the session, and the GM said, okay, everyone reach under your chair. And under our chair was taped a character sheet for a completely different character that we knew nothing about. And he dropped us into this sort of side adventure that met our characters with the expectation that we were going to kill everyone in this like little party that we were, that our real characters would kill these people, but we wound up integrating like half of them into our group. And then from then on, they were like sometimes player characters, sometimes he played them, and it was just sort of, he was like, I didn't expect that. I just expected they would all die, and here we are. So now they're part of the narrative.
Right. Yeah. This might be a good point for my story, such as it is. I number of years ago, I was lucky enough to, when I was still living in the Twin Cities, I was in a GURPS campaign that was run by the science fiction writer John M. Ford, okay, known to his friends as Mike. And we were playing in a fantasy Renaissance setting. Renaissance, actually, well, it was, the setting was basically that of the Three Musketeers, except that there were differences. It was not the same as his setting in his novel The Dragon Waiting, but there were elements that we could figure out. And one of the things that ended up happening was that most of the other players in the group, well, about half of them were themselves published writers. And so one of the things that ended up happening as part of the gameplay, what do you think goes on when you get a bunch of published fiction writers all playing together in a role-play game?
Oh boy. It's going to take some turns. They're going to do some crazy, crazy crap.
Yeah. Well, do you think that they'd be good at characterization?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely they were. And this included Cara Dalkey and Stephen Bruce and Pamela Dean and a number of other people. And we were all part of the same social group at the time through the Minnesota Science Fiction Society. You know what they're bad at? Collective action. No, I'm going to take the story this way.
Yeah.
And Stephen Bruce's solution to this, under some circumstances, whenever Stephen got bored, and I have to tell you, I like Stephen. He's an interesting guy, but he would get bored pretty easily. And so his solution to this was, his character was a Hungarian nobleman, and we were in Paris of the time, about 1630 something. And if he got bored, he would say, "I take out my pistol and shoot the person on my left." We all learn not to stand to the left of the character, right? And then on top of it, the other thing that ended up happening is that we got so used to who we were and what we were doing, that since his character was a nobleman and the rest of us were different social statuses, that we would end up just simply, most of the time, having dinner parties at his Maison de Vie in Paris, until Rochefort from the Cardinal's Guard would show up and say, "The Cardinal has something for you to do." Oh, right. We have to save France. We keep forgetting that.
Well, and I think it's a good point to kind of go from a design there's two levels. There's the design standpoint and then the game master's standpoint, where you're sort of like, we recognize that players are ultimately the point, right? Like if them having fun is the whole idea. So we want to give them control. But yeah, if we give them the steering wheel and they immediately point the car at the cliff, what is our play, right? How do we behave in that space? Do we try to get them back on track? And how heavy-handed do you want to be with that? And again, some systems are better or worse at doing that.
Right. We were relatively lucky in that particular circumstance, in that we were like, oh, wait, we do have to cue into what we're here for.
Sure.
Yeah, the notional game contract that we had at the beginning of the campaign. It's like, oh, right, yes, there are existential threats to the king and the queen and France. So
right. And it is a balance. I mean, that is the thing about, like, again, the basic eternal part of this thing is that you're introducing a random aspect to whatever game it is, which are the players who are going to do whatever they want to do. I mean, that's why, the famous rule of cool, like I feel like once you throw out the rule of cool, then you're now into emergent gameplay. Now you're literally breaking the rules. Like you are not allowed to do X, Y, or Z, but it's going to look cool. So roll some dice about it and see how it turns out. All of that aspect of the game is just built in. It's built into role playing. It's to a certain degree built into board games as well. I've verged out a little bit. I recently played a round of Betrayal at the haunted house or whatever. I forget
Betrayal
the
at House of the Hill.
House on the Hill, and like that can go very, very wrong very quickly. Like the last round I played, we all lost. Like, and the guy who won, who was playing the monster, did not want to win. He was really frustrated that we didn't beat him, and we just blew ourselves up by accident. It's just like these are the things that are part of the fun of the whole thing. But yeah, to your point, as a writer, like I also find myself like having to remind myself like, one, I'm not playing all the parts. It's not my story to tell. Even sometimes when I'm in a scene and I'm like, I know obviously what we're supposed to do here, but that's not what my character would do, and that's not my job. So we're just gonna fumble around for a while.
Yeah, I think Betrayal is a really good point. And in fact, board games, which are a little bit of my world, give us a space where it might look like we have more control, right? Like you actually do write a rule book. You actually do, okay, do the setup like this. Here's what you do on your turns. It's the space is a lot more constrained than it is for a role-playing game. And yet, what we still need to recognize is the players know more than we do. For whatever reason, off the top of my head, I want to go to the example of the Dune board game, which I have played many a time and which has a very complicated rule set. But once you know all the rules, okay, this is how it works. This is my character. This is the faction that I'm playing. This is what I'm allowed to do. And like one of those factions, the Atreides, are allowed to peek at cards as they're being auctioned off. And so a question that has come up virtually every time I've seen that game played is, well, okay, I have some information and I get to look at this information, and then the card goes into somebody else's hand, and so it's hidden from me again, right? So I knew it, and now it's hidden. So am I allowed to write that down, right? Like the game basically just goes, here it is now, and then it's gone. But presumably I, as a player, are better at worse at retaining information at that, so the rule book doesn't actually specify this. Most of the groups that I've seen basically go, if you're very skilled at this game, then no. If you're new at this game, then yes. And that's a great tool for the players to go, look, we need to craft our experience. And if you're new, if you might be at a little bit of a disadvantage, then essentially the rules are the same, but we're going to interpret them in the way that is most beneficial to you. And you're very good at this. You're great. Then we're going to interpret the rules in a way that is the most stringent for you. We're not breaking the rules. We're just creating a game that we're hopefully going to have a fun time playing. And a designer who tried to write all of those rules into the rule book would wind up with a rule book that was 1,000 pages long and still didn't do that.
Yeah. Actually, one example of this, I don't know if either of you are familiar with the older game of Civilization from Avalon Hill. Not the same as Sid Meier's Civilization.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Where you're all playing emergent civilizations around the Mediterranean basin, right? And at one point, I mean, this is a game that you can take a long time to play. And we decided one weekend that what we were going to do was to play the game cooperatively rather than competitively, because we wanted to get to the early Iron Age or the late Iron Age as soon as possible, because dear God, this game was going to last too long otherwise. Right. I mean, we all cheered when we got Martin's, I think he was the Cretans, to the late Iron Age, going like, yay, somebody made it, which is not at all the way that the game is intended to be played at all. But we're like, what's the best deal we can make so that you get, there's sort of this Settlers of Catan trading moment in each turn. And and the game was enjoyable because of that. We could have played competitively the way it was intended, but for us emergently, the idea was, no, let's just play it cooperatively and see what happens.
Right. But then there's, the cases where that all goes sort of wildly awry. I mean, I think of Monopoly. I think of how far Monopoly has sort of gone from its origins and intentions. But then there's just simply, I remember reading that like you're supposed to auction off every property when someone lands on it the first time, which is a rule that I'm pretty sure no one has ever played with. And there's like an automatic tool to make this game more enjoyable and quicker, and we have all opted to make it longer and more difficult. It's the opposite of playing old Trivial Pursuit. When I guess, yeah, anyone who's planned to play a board game with a bunch of kids of any kind, even when you were all kids, you've learned those hacks of like, okay, we're gonna give you a pie piece on every spot to get this over with quicker and to move this along. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night.
Right, and that's a great example, right? Like, let's give the kids this advantage, or let's give people who may have might not know as much this advantage, and then the more skilled players choose to play by the book rules. Yeah. I think Civilization is actually a great example as well. I mean, in terms of emergent gameplay, I mean, the question is, what even is the game? Civilization then evolved into Mega Civilization, a relatively recent addition, which takes it up to 18 players and adds a whole board space. And the game probably takes 20 hours to play now. And I played it recently in one of Peter Adkinson's charity events. Cool. And so we're playing it at the table, right? We've got it all set up. We're doing the thing. And we're live streaming the event to raise money for charity. And so at some point, one of the people watching the stream is like, okay, you two are playing too nice. Me and another Digipen instructor. They're like, you guys are both on the same team here. That's not supposed to happen. I will donate $200 to this stream if you stab him now. Ow, I've been stabbed now, right? Like, that's great. Bring it on. That sounds wonderful. And that sort of thing again, right? Like, it's not in the rules. And like, if you walked up to somebody playing a normal board game and said, I'll give you $200 to screw that other person, we could make an argument about whether or not that's appropriate gameplay. But when we're doing it for charity, now this is part of the gameplay.
But is this a game of diplomacy?
All games.
Oh wait, no. Oh, really? Well, that's an interesting perspective.
I got a compliment from a friend once who said that I'm only allowed to play Settlers of Catan with her if I agree not to talk. All games are games of diplomacy.
Well,
I like that.
I like that.
Ooh, okay, we have a question.
We have a question. We have a question. That's right.
Hallelujah.
So someone posts, how does one handle younger players that are prone to not thinking cause and effect scenarios? Do you just re-roll the dice or work with what they got?
I love this question. This is great. I think that when they're not thinking through cause and effect, I think part of what we're saying here is just they don't have any implied rules to go off of, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have the experience and the knowledge to go, oh, if I do these things, this will happen. If I do this will happen. And so this flailing around may be an attempt to explore the space. And to the extent that this is appropriate, I would let it play out exactly the way that it should play out, right? If they insult the guards and start talking a lot of smack, then maybe they get, I wouldn't want to kill their character, but maybe they wake up after spending the night in the town jail, and get to see, oh, okay, that's the outcome of that kind of action. Now I can incorporate that into my rules for behavior later. The more you lean on it and sort of have everything magically work out for them, the more you deny them the opportunity to understand how these things play out.
Yeah, I'm always a little back and forth on metagaming. In most of the games that I play, there's there's a fair amount of like, you announce your intention and sometimes the GM will be like, now remember, that aspect is a cone and it's going to fry everyone in that region. That includes this guy. Do you still want to cast that spell? And sure. Sometimes you go, no, I don't want to cast that spell. Let me see what else I can do. But sometimes you're like, screw it. I got to do this. This is the only way out of this, or this is what my character would do. So sorry, buddy, you're in the way of the fireball.
I was going to say, I cast fireball. You sure you want to do it? Well, I
I
cast
didn't ask
fireball.
you how big the room was. I said I guess.
I said I cast fireball.
Yeah, and a lot of people that I know wind up with some form of GM avatar in the space, playing a character's familiar or playing an advisor or playing something like that. Again, particularly for kids or people who might need a little bit of that help. So it doesn't feel so much like I'm telling you that you're playing the game wrong, and it can feel more like, oh, the actual world is doing this correctly, right? Like this is how you know that's a bad idea.
I do want to add one more aspect to this question, and that is, again, speaking from my background as a sociologist, it also depends on the age of the players. When we say younger players, I know my responses would be different if I'm dealing with a young player who's like 6 or 7 years old versus one who's 9 or 10, and another one who's like 13 or 14. And what I'm trying to get at here are roughly Piaget's stages of development, but that a truly young player is basically going to need to be introduced to everything because they're not familiar with their own world, much less the one that they're experiencing in the game.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you mentioned that it's 12 and 10-year-old kids with autism. I think and really at all, there's a sort of triangle of behavior in role-playing game design, gamist, narrativist, simulationist play, where the players are likely to what does winning mean, right? What is my goal here? What do I want out of this experience? And understanding your players' goals, and this is just as true with kids as it is with adults, it's just a thing to do. If my goal is to win from some gamist standpoint, the quest said to go kill the Lord of the Orcs. Great. So my goal is to go kill the Lord of the Orcs, and I will feel sad if I have failed to accomplish that. That's one way to play, and there's nothing wrong with that. The narrativist player wants to go, I want to be part of a really powerful story, and I want to be important in that story, but the story is what is important. And so if I fail to kill the Lord of the Orcs and I wind up imprisoned and they take all my stuff and I toil in a mines for a while and then I have to escape and rescue, and do I save these people or not save these people and take them with me? Like if I was part of a cool story, the fact that I failed the quest is very different than having failed the game. Right. And so that's different. And then the simulationists want to behave like they were actually there and there's no Lord of the Orcs, and that's a different conversation. But there's nothing wrong if what happens is the dice say that you don't get to kill the Lord of the Orcs, then whether or not that's going to be bad really depends on what you think the player wanted.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like when it comes to sort of interpreting dice rolls and all of that, I mean, you definitely sort of, I don't know, in my experience, always let the dice roll and let the roll be the roll. And if it's a 1 in a million shot and they roll that nat 20 for the 1 in a million shot, they did it. It happens in life that sometimes the 1 in a million shot makes it. The smaller army beats the bigger army, and you got to live with it and move on. And sometimes, that if there's, depending on the game system and depending on the rules that you've all sort of agreed with, sometimes there are still complications, sometimes that 1 in a million shot still doesn't do the trick, or it does something different,
Which, actually, one more point here, Jeremy, you had mentioned earlier Green Ronin. I think in their Fantasy Age system, the use of stunt points is an interesting way to have something like that happen, just like Jay was describing.
Absolutely. And you see it in Karma and Shadowrun and other structures. I mean, one question in the tabletop role-playing space often is the player special? Like, obviously, from a metagame standpoint, as designers, the players are the only thing that matters. But are their characters the chosen one, or are they just some schmuck in a bar, right? Sure. And again, neither of those are bad. But if they're the chosen one, then some amount of ability to bend reality to their will in the direct form of here's a certain number of get out of jail free points that you can spend to make those 1 in a million shots, right? Like the player might go, oh, I'm the chosen one. I'm going to make a 1 in a million shot like every other session. Cool, right? Like if that's the kind of game that you want, that's really valuable.
We've got our 10-minute mark. Let's see here. We've got 2 questions here. When playing Risk, a board game, do you go base off of roles or history? Clearly, a major army. This is the 1 in a million shot question.
Yeah.
In a different way. Clearly, a major army situated in an attack should be able to defeat a smaller one, but often the dice pull a miracle roll. Go for the miracle or history or a mix.
I would suggest that Vietnam proves you wrong. An argument that sheer strength of numbers is deterministic is inaccurate. And here's the thing. If you want to play that sort of game, play tabletop role-playing games that use that sort of rule set, right? There's nothing wrong with chit-based games where I just basically, oh, you've got a 9 and I've got a 7, so I guess I lose this fight. The difference is 2, so I lose 2 points worth of units. Okay, cool. Risk says, here's dice.
Yep.
I would suggest that you buy into that and let the dice do their job, or you play something else, and neither of those are wrong.
Yeah, I would say that that Risk is a relatively unsophisticated game for the purposes of getting "quote unquote" realistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's simple, but basically, do you want to play Risk or do you want to play Stratego at that level, right?
Stratego.
Because Stratego doesn't have those random elements.
No, it doesn't.
And that's fine.
Yep.
But I think it if somebody wants more history, I would say get into some of the more finely grained war games in order to see what that might look like.
Right.
Play diplomacy. It doesn't. I mean, you don't have to get it super overcomplicated.
That's a point. You are correct. I will agree with you on that. Okay, let's see here. Did you know that several types of psychology are now introducing RPGs into therapy, speech included? Any thoughts or suggestions for games that would be less rule heavy than, say, D&D or change? Oh, okay. Often I have found that I'm completely rewriting the rule book to get through the play. Sure. I have thoughts, but go ahead, gentlemen. Gentle people.
I mean, I would dive in on the game system that I mentioned earlier that we talked a little about, Powered by the Apocalypse, is of the game systems I've played, sort of the most open-ended in any game that's sort of based on that. A buddy of mine has just recently released one called Demigods, where you play as the child of a god, and it's a lot of fun to play, and it is very, very story and role play and character heavy. I'm sure there's a way to design a campaign that would be very dice rolly, but I've done entire sessions where we didn't roll a die, where we just role played and talked about things. Maybe there was one dice roll, but we just explored the world and had a little adventure. And that can be really useful. That's what I found, at least in my experience, that of the game systems, that one is pretty open-ended, and there aren't a lot. You don't get bogged down in a lot of sort of having to explain rules and things, and a lot of the narrative lands in the hands of the players.
What would you think of a game like, say, for example, Fate Accelerated, or one of the variants on the Fate system for something like this? Or am I off in the weeds?
Well, no, I think that's a good direction to go. I would want to push much further than that, actually. Fiasco might be a good system.
Sure. Okay.
I think your goal is, from a psychology standpoint, from a therapy standpoint, from a, we're trying to work through some particular thing standpoint, you want as much interactive storytelling in that space as you can. And the structure and dice are probably going to get in the way of that. So Fiasco might be good. Actually, any of the LARPing structures might be good. I have a little bit of a bias, but going to Mind's Eye Theater gives you some ability to, because Mind's Eye Theater expresses a lot of things in terms of verbs. And so it's not, oh, you have 4 points and I have 3 points and there's 9 points and there's all this structure and I leveled up. And those are all gamist nonsense. But the idea of, here are words that express what real people can actually do in these settings that we're acting out because we can't physically do them or shouldn't. That language can let you access the play, the experience much faster.
Yeah.
That's great. Actually, that's a really very good point, both of you. We have, I think, time for one last question. Yeah, this is our 5 minutes, so let's see if we can wrap this up with this question. In the game Paranoia, a major aspect is bureaucracy and fascinating ways of dying. Yes. Any suggestions on helping people understand how bureaucracy can be fun? Often I find other people dealing with government fully understand the concept and others not so much. I have a one-word answer for this, but I'm interested in what you have all to say.
I want to hear the one word first.
No. I want. Okay, fine. Actually, my one-word answer is Brazil. Go check out the movie Brazil, and you will get to see both the dark side of bureaucracy and also the absurdist, funny side of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I would think of bureaucracy often as a good adventure hook that is causing adventures to happen, right? Like, I'm playing, of all things, the video game West of Loathing right now, which is quite good and which you should play immediately. And there's a spot where there's this ghost town, like of actual ghosts, and you have to get them to do stuff. So you have to fill out some paperwork. You have to fill out actual little application forms. And it goes, okay, well, to do that, you have to go get it stapled, which means I have to go over here on this other quest to find the guy who has the staple authorization. And he's like, well, I would totally do that for you, except I don't have a stapler. So now you're on a quest to get a stapler.
No, that's
but
my stapler. You can't have my stapler.
Right. The fun isn't stapling the paperwork. The fun isn't filling it out. This is just a hook that says, oh, now I have to go on this quest to get the stapler instead of getting the magic sword or getting the who's what's its. And then the play is the quest and the stapler is a reward structure. And you can make all of the jokes about the ridiculousness of bureaucracy without making me fill out forms for half an hour.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, you just figure out a way to gamify bureaucracy and just make that your setting and just live in that world,
Or make filling out the forms fun. I now have this desire to turn Mad Libs into some kind of RPG tool.
Oh, man.
Where, okay, from a bureaucracy standpoint, like I have to fill out these forms and I'm like, okay, well, I need a, bureaucratic title. Well, what quest? Well, we did that quest and that quest. So we have access to these two titles. Okay, cool. So I can put that in here and on and on and on. Yep. You can make a whole system out of that.
Yeah, and all of it sounded like it'd be actually fun to play.
Yeah.
We have just barely 2 minutes left. We haven't gotten our 2-minute warning, but are there any last thoughts for our audience? Because we will be done in 2 minutes. So
I defer to Jeremy for this one.
Yeah, I would just suggest that the more that you are creating content, whether you're a designer or a dungeon master of some form, recognize the enormous value in player input and player control. Recognize that you're not in control and you're not going to be, and that's a good thing. Right. And the more we can let them shape their experience and provide content, the more they have a good experience with what we've created.
One last question. Are you going to be in Discord afterwards, and do you want to plug where you're to be found? As I said, techmlpodcast.com for me.
Generally, you can find me on Twitter is the best place to find me, at jholtham on the Twitter machines.
Yeah, and I was paid to say at Twitter where I post ridiculous things that I have said to my students.
Lovely. And then I don't know if we want to continue this discussion on Discord. I think I'll drop in there briefly afterwards.
Yep, I love you all, and you can hunt me down.
Okay.
I unfortunately cannot join the Discord today, but find me on the interwebs.
Yep.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope everyone had a good time.
Thank you. This was a blast.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right. There we are. We can call it done, even if we have 30 seconds left.
Okay, cool.
Love it. Thank you all.
Yay.
Thanks so much. Have a great evening.